Hi guys, and welcome to today's video where I'll be discussing which of my geckos is the easiest to handle, because I get this question a lot, especially comparing leopard geckos with crested geckos, so I figured I'd go through each type of gecko that I own and let you know. So a brief history of me if you're new here. I have owned leopard geckos for over a decade. I currently own 4. Gizmo, Minnie, Diego and Ziggy. I've owned crested geckos for just over 3 years and a Mossy prehensile-tailed gecko for under a year. So as you can imagine, I have plenty more experience with leopard geckos. However, since I interact with and handle my geckos almost daily, I feel I have a lot of hands-on experience with them all. So let's start off with my newest gecko, the Mossy prehensile-tailed gecko, better known as a Chahoua. Now, a lot of people have recently asked me whether this is a good beginner reptile. In terms of care, they're very similar to crested geckos, very easy to look after in my opinion. However, handling wise, I'd say they're a lot quicker. Now, in fairness, I've only really ever interacted with this one gecko, so I can't really judge an entire group of animals based on this one gecko, but when this little guy wants to move, he will move quick. He seems to have 2 modes. One is just sit and stay still, and 2 is parkour. Literally, he will run and jump sideways, and before you know it, he's out of your sight. He's crazy. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, and I don't even see it as him not being tame. For me, not being tame means a gecko is constantly stressed when being handled. It attempts to bite, it's performing, threatening displays, and overall it's just scared of its owner. Instead, what I see is when this little guy starts jumping around, he is well charged, he's full of life, he's a healthy gecko, and I think that's what we should aim for. Unlike the crested gecko, however, he doesn't give me much warning when he's about to jump, so it can catch me by surprise. That moves me on to crested geckos. So this is Lyra. She's 3 years old. She's absolutely lovely. I think she's a healthy size and weight, and she whistles at me. Isn't that just the cutest little thing? If you haven't seen that yet, there's a video, go check that out. So, of course, crested geckos also love to run and jump just like Chahuas. However, they tend to be slightly slower, and also they give you a bit of a pre-warning before jumping usually. They will focus on a target and then jump, and also you'll feel their back legs tense up a little bit, whereas I don't notice that with the Chahoua. However, don't be fooled because they can move quick, and I have seen Lyra go the length of my room in a few seconds by just jumping. It's actually quite impressive. In terms of temperament, I have found that crested geckos tend to be very sweet and docile. I've never, in my 3 years of having them, witnessed any aggression. You couldn't even imagine it. Like, I'm sure some people might experience that, but even if a crested gecko bites you, like, it doesn't hurt. Well, not in my experience, it doesn't. Like, honestly, you can't even feel their teeth. You wouldn't even notice your hand is in their mouth. They're just generally lovely little creatures, and I definitely think they're great beginner reptiles, but don't expect them to sit still because they like to explore and jump, and I believe they should be allowed to. And personally, I would say if you want an easier experience with taming and handling your crested gecko, I'd say get them around 5 to 6 months old, just because when they're bigger they tend to be a little less skittish than the hatchlings. Finally, leopard geckos. So it's been a while since I've had to tame a leopard gecko. Actually, you can go back and watch a video when I first got Ziggy and she was around 3 weeks old, and I was so convinced she was going to scream at me and freak out, and actually she was absolutely lovely. And I think that comes with experience, because when you get your first leopard gecko, I was the same with Gizmo, you're always a little bit wary, especially if it's your first reptile. You're convinced it's going to turn around and bite you or freak out or drop its tail, and actually as you get to know them, you get really good with handling, and each new gecko becomes easier and easier. One thing I would say as well with any of these geckos, make sure you buy from a decent breeder or a very good, well-educated shop that handles their geckos very well and the animals are healthy, just because this makes your job a lot easier. And be wary if geckos are being discounted or they're sold too young. Now, I know Ziggy was only sold at 3 weeks old, but that was from a local breeder, like literally 5 minutes away from me. and because at that time I had so much experience with leopard geckos, that's why I got her. But usually I would say if you're getting a gecko that's only 3 weeks old, that's way too early. Anyway, back to handling. So these guys will not jump, although technically they do possess the ability to do so if necessary in a high stress situation. But normally all they do is walk and climb up your arms, onto your shoulders, on your back, on your neck, everywhere. You're basically just a giant climbing frame to them. They're also very sweet though, and I find they're slightly more sensitive to things compared to my other geckos, which you wouldn't really think. You would think like maybe a crested gecko might be a bit more skittish than a leopard gecko, but even the tamest of my leopard geckos can get spooked. Something as simple as a sudden sound, or if I put the geckos on the floor to walk around, which to be honest I wouldn't recommend, they tend to get a lot easily spooked than say a crested gecko. But don't let that put you off of them, because these are amazing animals with lots of personality, and though they can move fast and some people struggle a little bit to tame them, in my experience I've never had a problem. I've made tons of videos about ways of handling your gecko and taming them, so if you ever get stuck you can always watch those. And if you don't want a gecko that jumps a lot, then a leopard gecko may be for you. Now all 3 types of these geckos are able to drop their tails, however crested geckos are the only ones that can't grow them back. In my experience, tails don't tend to drop off for no reason, though I have heard many stories of people waking up and finding their crested geckos have detached their tails during the night, and actually that has also happened to me with one of my geckos who sadly passed away, Isla. Now, despite all of that, many people fear that just because the tail can drop off, it will drop off as if you even touch it. And that isn't true. As long as you don't grab your gecko, you're not handling it roughly, you should be fine. But don't let that freak you out when you're learning to handle your gecko. The best advice I can give you when getting a new lizard and attempting to tame it is to be careful, consistent, and confident. Also make sure you don't get your geckos out around cats and dogs. I know some people really trust their furry pets, but trust me, our scaly friends are seen as toys and prey to cats and dogs, so be very careful with your geckos out, especially the jumpy ones. So I hope this video has helped. I know choosing the right gecko for you can be very difficult, and you may even still be none the wiser. You may be thinking, I really want a leopard gecko, but I don't know, maybe I want a crested gecko. But trust me, one thing's for sure, you'll never stop at one reptile. You might get a leopard gecko now, but I'm sure sometime in the future you'll also get a crested gecko or even a Chahoua. So thanks for watching guys, and goodbye.
Ew, 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 ew. Ew, ew, she's gone to the little me, gross.